All right, so get ready because we're diving into a case that is, well, it's both baffling and heartbreaking. We're talking about Angela Green. She vanished from, well, a seemingly totally normal Kansas suburb and left her family grappling with all these unanswered questions and honestly, a mountain of suspicion.
Yeah, and what makes this case so intriguing is it kind of throws that typical missing persons investigation on its head. There's no body, there's no crime scene, no clear indication really of what happened. It's like a puzzle, but with some really crucial pieces missing. And the podcast we're diving into today, it does like an incredible job of piecing together the fragments, the pieces we
Yeah,
do have.
exactly. You got it. Our source is a true crime podcast, and it lays out all these perplexing details of Angela's disappearance, starting with the initial shock her daughter, Ellie, experienced when she learned about her mother's supposed death. 7 months after the fact. And get this, there's no death certificate.
Right from the start, you can sense that something just isn't right. And it only gets more tangled as we hear from Angela's husband, Jeff. And his account of events is anything but straightforward.
Yeah, it's like a story that keeps changing with every telling. First, it's a commitment to a mental health facility. Then it's a sudden cremation handled by a complete stranger. Then she just vanishes, like into thin air. Each version seems more outlandish than the last. And with each retelling the suspicions surrounding Jeff, it just grows.
What's interesting is the podcast uses those inconsistencies in Jeff's story. It draws us deeper into the mystery and prompts us to ask, is he simply a grieving husband who's struggling to process a traumatic event? Or is there
Okay.
something more calculated, more sinister even, behind his evasiveness?
Right, and then you have all the red flags. The bleach cleaning spree right after Angela supposedly left for the facility, the request to have Ellie forge her signature on a beneficiary form, the refusal to cooperate with the police. It's a pattern of behavior that, I don't know, it kind of screams guilty conscience, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's definitely enough to raise some eyebrows. And then you have the added layer of Angela's life before her disappearance. An unhappy arranged marriage, financial dependence on Jeff, and her struggles with mental health. It creates this complex backdrop that forces you to consider all the possibilities.
Right, so did she reach a breaking point and orchestrate her own disappearance? Was she the victim of foul play, with Jeff's actions being a desperate attempt to cover his tracks? Or is there something we're missing entirely? Some other explanation that, I don't know, that fits the pieces of this puzzle?
The podcast doesn't shy away from exploring those possibilities, and it walks us through the limited options that investigators are left with in what's called a no-body homicide case. Think about it. How do you prove a crime when you don't even have a victim to examine? It adds a whole other dimension to the investigation.
Yeah, it's a case where the absence of evidence becomes its own kind of evidence. And then there's Ellie. She embarks on her own quest for answers, confronting her father, reporting her mother missing, and even working with private investigators. Her determination is truly remarkable. And it's heartbreaking to hear her grapple with the uncertainty and the emotional toll of the media spotlight.
Her persistence leads to two key locations being searched: the Green residence and Jeff's industrial site, with a storage unit and a car trailer. The scale of the search, involving over 100 officers and cadaver dogs, underscores the seriousness of the investigation.
Yet, despite their efforts, no conclusive evidence is found. It's a frustrating setback, both for the investigators and for Angela's family. We are left clinging to the hope that some new lead will emerge and shed light on her fate.
And that brings us to a point where we have to shift our thinking a bit. Without a body, we're forced to rely on a different kind of investigation, one that focuses on motive, behavior, and the intricate web of relationships surrounding Angela. And that's where things get really interesting.
We're left with this unsettling feeling that the truth is it's buried somewhere beneath all these layers of deception and half-truths, like trying to solve a puzzle. But someone keeps swapping out the pieces.
Exactly. And that's what makes this case so captivating. The podcast goes deeper, It goes deeper into Angela's life and paints this picture of a woman who was financially dependent on Jeff and trapped in a marriage.
Yeah.
That seemed more like a business arrangement than a loving partnership.
Right. And we learn about the significant age gap between them and Jeff's inability to speak Chinese, despite his supposed business trips there, and Angela's confided anxieties about her situation.
Yeah, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion, really, revealing more and more complexity with each new detail.
And we hear from Angela's niece, Michelle. She reveals that Angela had been secretly saving money, stashing it away, because she wanted a safety net. for herself and Ellie. But here's the thing. That money, along with her passport, her ID, and other essentials, it was left untouched. So if she planned to disappear, why wouldn't she take those things with her?
It's a crucial detail. It throws a wrench into the theory that she simply ran away. And then there's the emotional aspect of the case, which the podcast handles with remarkable sensitivity.
Yeah, we hear Ellie's struggle, this agonizing struggle, as she tries to reconcile her father's, his ever-changing stories, with the possibility that her mother might have abandoned her.
It's gut-wrenching to listen to those recorded conversations between Ellie and Jeff. You can hear the desperation in her voice as she pleads with him for the truth, for some semblance of closure, but he remains evasive, contradicting himself, and ultimately shutting down any real communication.
Yeah, those conversations are pivotal. They reveal the raw human impact of this mystery. It's not just a puzzle to be solved. It's a family torn apart by uncertainty and grief. And the podcast doesn't let us forget that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how the podcast highlights the cultural nuances that play a role in this case. The fact that some neighbors just assumed that Angela had simply returned to China, it speaks volumes about how easily assumptions can be made, especially when cultural differences are involved.
Right. It underscores the importance of approaching these investigations with an open mind and avoiding the pitfalls of prejudice or stereotypes.
Now, the podcast does present the possibility that Angela chose to leave, perhaps seeking a fresh start or escaping a difficult situation. But even then, there are doubts. Her strong emotional connection to Ellie, the untouched belongings, the lack of any financial activity, it all makes a clean break seem unlikely.
Right. It's like those details, they create this counter-narrative. Like he's pulling us back to the possibility of something more sinister. The episode meticulously takes us through the timeline, leading up to Angela's disappearance. And it zooms in on that day, the day of the heated argument between her and Ellie.
We know Jeff's alibi for that night checks out, but then you have that unsettling comment from his brother's wife, hinting at the possibility of an accident.
It throws yet another twist into the story, and it prompts a search of Jeff's second home. What's particularly chilling is Ellie's discovery of that patch of disturbed earth, marked with Angela's favorite flowers, and showing signs of something buried beneath the surface. You can practically feel the tension as the cadaver dogs react to that spot. But ultimately, nothing conclusive is found.
It's a classic case of one step forward, two steps back. The podcast does a brilliant job of keeping us on the edge of our seats, mirroring the ups and downs of a real investigation. But it also reminds us that real life doesn't always offer neat resolutions.
Exactly. The ambiguity is part of what makes this case so compelling. The podcast doesn't force a conclusion. It encourages us to weigh the evidence, consider the possibilities, and grapple with the fact that we may never know the full truth.
And that's where the real discussion begins.
So here we are, sifting through this mountain of circumstantial evidence, trying to make sense of a disappearance that has honestly left us with more questions than answers. It's like we're detectives, piecing together these fragments of this story, trying to figure out what really happened to Angela Green.
And that's the beauty of this podcast, isn't it? It invites us to engage in that process of deduction, to weigh the evidence and consider the different perspectives. It doesn't hand us a neat conclusion, which I kind of like. It challenges us to draw our own.
Absolutely. As we go deeper into this case, I keep thinking about the ethical dilemmas that come up so often in these types of investigations. On one hand, you have the need to find the truth and bring justice to those who may have been wronged. But then on the other hand, there's the question of privacy, of respecting the rights of individuals, even those under suspicion.
It's a tightrope walk for sure. And the podcast does a good job, I think, showing how investigators have to balance their pursuit of the truth with the need to avoid jumping to conclusions or violating anyone's rights. It's a reminder that even in these really high stakes cases, due process matters.
It does. And speaking of those involved, I'm struck by the family's decision not to pursue a wrongful death lawsuit against Jeff, despite their strong suspicions. It says a lot about their priorities, really. It seems their focus is less on seeking financial compensation and more on uncovering the truth about what happened to Angela.
It's a powerful statement, and it underscores the depth of their loss and the complexity of their grief, They're not seeking revenge, they're seeking answers. And that $25,000 reward offered by the private investigator, it's another testament to their commitment to finding those answers, no matter how long it takes.
It's a reminder that even when facing such uncertainty, hope persists. And it makes me wonder, What if that reward does lead to a breakthrough? What if someone out there knows something, some small detail that could, I don't know, crack this case wide open? It's a tantalizing possibility.
It is, and it highlights the fact that this investigation is far from over. Law enforcement is still actively pursuing leads, and new technology, particularly in the realm of digital forensics, could unearth crucial evidence that was previously overlooked.
Right. Think about all the data we generate
Yeah.
in our daily lives. Text messages, emails, location data, online searches. It's a vast digital footprint. And if it's analyzed carefully, well, it could hold the key to solving this mystery.
That's an excellent point. It brings us back to the enduring power of these no-body homicide cases. They force us to think outside the box, to rely on a different set of tools and strategies. They challenge our assumptions about what constitutes proof. And they remind us that sometimes the absence of physical evidence can be the most compelling evidence of all.
It's a it's a chilling thought, but it's also incredibly thought-provoking. It makes us realize that justice, well, it doesn't always come in a neat package with a bow on top. Sometimes it's a long, winding road filled with all these twists and turns. And the truth can be a very slippery and elusive thing.
And yet, the pursuit of that truth is what keeps us going, you know? It's what drives investigators, it motivates families, and it compels us, the listeners, to engage with these stories, to grapple with the complexities, and to hope, even when facing uncertainty, that justice will ultimately prevail.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think we're all left with a lingering sense of unease, a feeling that the story of Angela Green is far from over. It's a story that challenges us to confront the darker aspects of human nature, to acknowledge the limitations of our knowledge, and to appreciate the enduring power of hope in the face of adversity. Thank you all for joining us on this journey into the heart of a mystery. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.